I guess I'll just do a little quick intro here. I'm Emily Cole, so I'm admin specialist for local foods team. Lynn's husband is not well today, so I'm stepping in for her. We're recording this video, so that'll help later on. Our panelists are Kayla Koether. Kayla, how do I pronounce your last name?
Koether.
Koether. Oh, okay. Kayla Koether and Savanna Lyons, and Jason Grimm will not be with us today. Also a sick individual, I guess. That sounded bad. You know what I mean? Not healthy. So we'll start out with these ladies giving their presentation. They're going to go through some of the questions that you guys had asked prior to the webinar, and then after that, they'll open it up.
So I'll kick it off. This is Savanna, and let me share my screen here. Give me just 1 second. Okay, can everybody see all right? Can you see my screen now instead of me? Great. So I am I'm a recent graduate of Iowa State University. I was part of the local foods team at Iowa State University Extension and Outreach based out of Ames, and I worked with Craig Chase there on research related to food hubs. Just graduated in, I guess, a little over a year ago. So I spent about 3 years in Iowa working with food hubs. I helped start up the Food Hub Managers Working Group, which is a supportive group of managers of food hubs all around Iowa. And Kayla is now managing that group, so she'll tell you more about it. But I also had the opportunity to travel around the country and visit with about 13 food hubs of larger scales to interview them about their finances and how they evaluate themselves financially, and to take a deep dive into some of their finances. I was an interim manager of Farm Table Delivery, which is procurement and delivery, which is a food hub based out of Harlan in Western Iowa. And so I helped manage the logistics and the accounting there for a period of time while the owner was on maternity leave. And I'm currently managing Refresh Appalachia food hubs. I've relocated to West Virginia, and we're a little bit different from a typical food hub. We do some more types of activities, so I'll talk about that. And I'm here today to give you a little bit of a general overview of what food hubs are and what they look like. And Kayla is going to give you a little more information about food hubs in Iowa, and then we're both here to answer all the questions you have. And it looks like from the information we received from Lynn, it looks like there's quite a variety of questions, ranging from how do I start a food hub to, what are the opportunities for buyers, to kind of like nitty-gritty questions about cash flow and management. So we're going to try to answer some of those questions that we received ahead of time, and then just really open it up to you to let you guide the conversation. So those are some of the organizations that I work with now that are on the screen. And then Refresh Appalachia Food Hub is based in Charleston, West Virginia. Just to give you a little background, we are also a beginning farmer training program. So we train people, we provide paid on-the-job training for beginning farmers to work with our program for 2 to 3 years, and they're also enrolled in college, and they earn an associate's degree as part of the program, earning credits through their on-the-job training. And then we created the Food Hub to create opportunities for the beginning farmers who we're training and incubating, and also to create opportunities for other farmers in the region. So we're a nonprofit, and we do a lot of different activities. That's the end of my intro. So what's a food hub? This is USDA's definition, and I'll just read it out loud. A business or organization that actively manages the aggregation, distribution, and marketing of source-identified food products from local and regional producers to strengthen their ability to satisfy wholesale, retail, and institutional demand. So there's a whole lot there in that definition. I think some of the important things to take away from that definition: aggregation, distribution, and marketing are all different types of activities. So here's a diagram of kind of a food value chain, which here is shown as a cycle, which is kind of cool because if you're able to capture waste at the end of the food chain, you can actually cycle it back into production. And it's really the aggregators, processors, distributors, and then to some extent food service and food retail that food hubs get involved in managing. So most of us are, aggregation is collecting products together in one place. So that might mean providing a drop-off location for products from multiple farms. And it might include grading or packing those products. It might include providing some kind of food safety assurance. And then sometimes we do processing. Sometimes many of us don't do any processing. Some of us do. So processing could include anything from fresh cut processing to thermal processing to put things into cans, or freezing, drying, a whole range of things. Every food hub is different in response to the market demand that they see and the opportunity they see. And then distribution obviously is getting food to customers, to users. And then some food hubs do participate in some kind of retail. So we don't do retail with a storefront, but we do retail through a CSA, through a farm shares program, a subscription program where people can sign up to receive a share of produce once a week. And then we do retail through a consignment partner, a couple of consignment partners actually, who hold our products and sell them for us for a commission. So we deal with other food hubs actually. And so why do people like this idea? Food hubs have gotten a lot of buzz in the past 10 years. And I think the main reason is that there's been a kind of a groundswell of beginning farmers, as I'm sure everyone knows. There's been an interest in farming and small to mid-scale farming and sort of saving agriculture of the middle. And small and mid-scale farms can access buyers that they can't otherwise access through food hubs. There's reduced marketing costs through shared marketing. So if I market your product with my marketing budget, it's sort of more efficient than 10 farmers marketing their own product, trying to do, expensive branding campaigns and advertising, and just costs of sales, actually like having a sales force. There's efficiencies from sharing those kinds of services. And something I put an asterisk next to these next three because USDA says they're really part of the defining characteristics of a food hub, and this is where values comes into it. So farmers are considered to be valued partners. They're often participants in the management of food hubs. And they're not considered to be interchangeable. It's like one farmer's tomato isn't necessarily interchangeable with another farmer's tomato because different tomatoes have different stories and different origins, and the story is a part of how we sell the product for a higher price. So the story of the farmer actually matters in the value chain. And so that ties into differentiating product to get a better price. So that branding, that storytelling, making sure that the story of the farmer makes it all the way to the end buyer so that story is kind of monetized. And the close relationship with producers. So most food hubs are trying to be financially viable while also having these positive impacts on their communities, and that's really challenging. And we can talk more about those challenges in a minute. So this is a little bit old information, but I just wanted to give a feel for kind of the flavor of food hubs. So in 2013, Arlene Enderton and Corey Bregendahl at the Leopold Center did a survey of food hub activities, and they found that 62% of the food hubs that participated in the study, there was, I think, 13 food hubs in the study. 62% were branding or labeling products based on origin. 54% were offering marketing services. 23% were freezing their products, and 8% were offering shared use kitchens so that farmers could develop their own products. In terms of what are the types of products food hubs are selling, again, this is from Iowa, this isn't national. And most of it was fruits and vegetables, and then a smaller portion of meat and eggs. So food hubs tend to have a strong emphasis on sort of healthy products, healthy living, food access for lower income communities where it's harder to get fresh produce. And this is from a national study of food hubs with 107 participants. And this was looking at what the organizational structures are of food hubs. And so I think people have, depending on where they stand, people have preconceptions that all food hubs are co-ops and farmer owned, or that all of them are nonprofit and grant funded. And it's really quite a mix. So, it's about almost half for profit, which is pretty interesting because of how hard it is to break even with a socially responsible business like this, that half of the food hubs out there are actually people who are either, self-funded or privately funded in some way and really putting their own assets on the line. And then 34% are nonprofits. And I think nonprofits tend to operate a little bit differently because they often provide more services because they have the resources to do so. And of course they can receive grants. And so nonprofit food hubs aren't better or worse than for-profits, but I think they tend to have a very different character, and they sometimes have a higher profile or are better publicized because they have a very strong educational role in the community. As far as size, so this is an interesting study that was done a little while ago looking at the finances of food hubs around the country based on what they reported themselves. And there's a lot of disagreement over what the break-even point is for food hubs, or whether you can say what the break-even point is for all food hubs, because some people are selling products that are really high margin, like a grocery store sells products at a higher margin. Some food hubs sell products where, you're adding 40 or 50 cents on the dollar to sort of pay for the convenience, the packaging, the marketing services. Other food hubs are selling products with a very narrow markup. So that really has a huge impact on what your break-even scale of sales is. But generally speaking, it seems like that break-even is above 1 million. And you kind of see how these are food hubs that were in the red. So the one at the top, the category that was under $125,000 a year in revenue were quite a bit in the red. So for every dollar of revenue that they were making, they were 42 cents in the red. And then you start to see that kind of reversing when you get up to this $1.5 million scale. You start to see some profit, but everybody's different. And there's some evidence to show that food hubs that are targeting direct-to-consumer markets can break even at a much lower scale, even $300,000 to $400,000. And I have seen some break even in the $800,000 range, personally. So the issue of scale is a big issue, and it really varies. I think one of the things that happens is because food hubs are so mission driven, they tend to keep reinvesting back into their infrastructure and reinvesting in their mission. So if I get really good at breaking even, serving 10 farmers who are of a medium scale, maybe I decide that I want to expand my mission and serve 5 more farmers who are of a smaller scale. Or maybe I decide I want to make a large investment in infrastructure that's costly in terms of loan interest or other things, new staffing, because I want to be able to serve more farmers. And so sometimes the growth is driven by the desire to provide services and not necessarily by a desire to make profit. And so food hubs make different decisions. So that's part of why it's so hard to see where break even is, and some of them are not breaking even at $3 or $4 million. And then the issue of farm scale is something, I think one of the people who sent questions ahead of time was asking, are the transaction costs too high if you're buying from all these little small farms and trying to market for them to different kinds of customers, like, individuals, institutions, restaurants, is that ever going to be viable? And the answer is it can be viable, but it is a lot of transactions to keep track of, and efficiency really matters in the way that you manage all those little transactions. So software is important, communication is important, having really good, having and enforcing criteria for how producers deliver products is important, and scheduling delivery in a way that's efficient, because of all of those little inefficiencies add up quickly. And I think as far as dealing with price, it's really important to manage farms, or to match farms to appropriate markets. So we have some larger customers that are, distributors that are looking for huge volumes of product at at a pretty low price. And then we have some customers who are individual households that are subscribing to our program and willing to pay a high margin for local food that's also conveniently delivered to their workplaces. And so a small farm is a good fit for that CSA, that farm share subscription, and that individual consumer, because they're willing to pay more. That large farm who wants to move a large volume is probably a better fit for a large distributor. So I really believe in having many operating with farmers of different scales and matching scale of the customer to scale of the farmer. So a little bit about my food hub. This is just an example, and we can talk about other examples later. But we're based in Charleston, West Virginia. I already talked a little bit about us. We have, like a lot of food hubs, we have several different types of market outlets. We don't just sell to institutions or farm to school. We don't just sell to restaurants. We really spread out our markets. And we do that because different customers have different characteristics and fit with different farms. So the farm shares are like a community supported agriculture program. They're prepaid. And those are really valuable to us because they help with cash flow, because they help kind of subsidize the other customers who have longer payment terms, like institutions and schools take longer to pay you. And so we need a mix of customers that pay quickly and customers that don't. We have an online market that we're just now launching, which is supposed to be the on-ramp for customers who are just starting to buy local food from us, who are individuals, to try to on-ramp them to subscribing to farm shares. And we're just now trying that out. We do consignment with some retailers, and then we do a weekly food service distribution where we drive a truck around and we deliver to restaurants and hospitals and schools. And we actually work quite a bit with other food hubs. I think that's maybe something surprising that people don't realize, is that food hubs really depend on each other to get products that they don't have access to in their own region. And so we actually are currently merging with another food hub so that we can cover the whole southern half of our state. And we partner with a co-op that specializes in aggregation and sort of producer coordination so that we can specialize in distribution and sales. And I think that kind of specializing really helps make us all more successful. But we also do other things. And I think this is like what gives us a unique flavor as a nonprofit, is we do a beginning farmer training program like I talked about. We also offer poultry processing. So we have 2 mobile poultry processing units that we take to farms and process on the farm. We train people how to do that. And then we try to find markets for that poultry. We're currently working with a meat distributor who we're hoping will sell our whole chickens. And then we have farmer workshops. We do a lot of training and capacity building with farmers in the area. And that all is done through grant funding. And we're heavily grant subsidized right now because we're a smaller food hub and we're still getting to the break-even point. So I'm going to stop there. So you've gotten a general introduction to what food hubs look like, and then a specific introduction to my food hub. And I want to turn it over to Kayla to talk about food hubs in Iowa.
All right. I saw that we had one question in the Q&A box, but maybe we can wait and address that at the end, because I think we're a little ways past when it popped up. So if that's all right, we'll look at that later.
Okay.
So I think that some of my slides are gonna mirror a little bit of what Savanna talked about. So I won't go into depth on all of them, and I'll probably stray from them quite a bit. So let me start by introducing myself. I'm Kayla Koether. As Savanna said, I now have the work of managing the Food Hub Managers Working Group with Jason Grimm, and we partner in that work. I'm based at Iowa State Extension and Outreach, and that's a position that's partially Region 4 and partially the state local food team. So I do a range of work, including working with beginning farmers and helping farmers network and write business plans and access what they need, but also helping the Food Hub managers get together and address their challenges and shared needs in the state. So I think, after we talked a little bit about what Savanna just shared, a lot of the things that I have in these slides is going to be similar. But I think one of the things I'd like to pull up and take a look at here is this graphic that I think helps describe a little bit of what Savanna was talking about, how food hubs can work with different size and different types of farms. And that's important because when you are looking at the institutional customers that a food hub might be working with, they might have different needs. And so as we try to support farmers on the landscapes that are at these small and medium-sized farms, we're able to mix and match what somebody like, say, a Luther College in our area or a large hospital or a Hy-Vee might need, and what they're looking for to put on their shelves at a certain price point and what their customers are demanding with what our farmers in the area are providing. So I think that is the flexibility that, and this is an example of what the Iowa Food Hub's preferred attributes are for who they work with, but at the same time, they have the flexibility to serve all farmers, starting with the base idea that things should be local to the food hub, and then sort of ramping up with helping beginning farmers and small and medium-sized farmers at the top, and folks who have certifications like good agricultural practices or being organic certified. And so there's a component of that is helping people improve their farm operations to where they can attain different certifications as well, as they're able to work with a hub and find markets. So I guess looking at some of the food hubs in Iowa, I'll take us down to a slide here. We have a lot of organizations in Iowa that are technically considered food hubs, and they all have pieces of that USDA definition that Savanna shared, where they are aggregating something and distributing it in some way. This is a map of all the organizations that were identified in 2015 as food hubs in some definition or another. Some that we would think of as more traditional food hubs, or those that are really heavily involved in the Food Hub Managers Working Group that I manage, include the Iowa Food Hub, which I just showed you their producer tier slide. They're here in Northeast Iowa. Farm Table Procurement and Delivery in Western Iowa. I wish I could point to my computer screen right now. Maybe I can do this with my mouse. So Farm Table Delivery is out here in Harlan in Western Iowa. And you can see that this is sort of the coverage area for her hub. And that is a privately owned hub by Ellen Walsh Roseman. And then the Iowa Food Cooperative is based here in Des Moines. The Iowa Valley Food Co-op is kind of undergoing a transition right now, so they're sort of re-envisioning themselves. And then we have the Iowa Food Hub here, and this map is a little dated, but these overlapping concentric circles are hubs that have been working together on cross-stocking food in the state. So they have been helping farmers in one region get their food products all the way across the state to sell. For example, milk that might be produced up in Waukon, Iowa, can make it all the way down to the Iowa Food Cooperative in Des Moines and out into Ellen's service territory in Western Iowa, and therefore reach a bigger marketplace. So in addition to these hubs covering different kind of parts of the state, they're all organized quite differently. So as Savanna has been talking about hubs that are aggregating and distributing produce, a lot of these hubs are doing produce, meat, eggs, a variety of foods, and they might be selling them into larger institutions like the Hy-Vees or the colleges, but then there can be a huge diversity. So the Iowa Food Co-op in Des Moines, they have a really unique model where they have an online grocery store, and it's a cooperative model. So both buyers and farmers are members of this co-op. And when you are a farmer that's involved in it, every 2 weeks you're able to post what's available for folks to buy from you and the quantity on an online management system. And then customers can come in and actually shop for what they want and buy it from a specific farmer. Then farmers deliver all the product, and folks actually show up in person to pick up their products. And so that's an example of a hub that's really facilitating retail sales directly to a consumer who's going to buy it directly from the farmer through the hub. And we'll have complete source verification because the consumer is actually choosing the specific farmer that they want to buy from. And that's also an example of when Savanna talked about hubs that can be a little bit lower in annual sales to break even. That's true of a hub like the Iowa Food Cooperative because they are capturing retail sales dollars and able to make the most of the full value of the dollar that the consumer is paying in order to support their staffing needs and their space needs. Then you can contrast a model like that to something like the Iowa Food Hub. And so you can see that the Iowa Food Cooperative is serving a smaller territory since they are direct to consumers and consumers are physically coming to the space. But you can contrast that with a model like the Iowa Food Hub that we saw the tiered producer model of, and they have a bit wider of a service area. In fact, they're also going to Chicago, but a lot of their sales are to larger institutions, and so they're not receiving as much of the total consumer dollar because they're working with high volumes, high quantities of products, and not able to add a lot of markup to those products as they go into the wider distribution chain and go to other retail outlets before they reach a consumer. So there's a big contrast and many different models for what food hubs are able to do. And I think looking at kind of a larger hub in contrast to one that can break even at a smaller scale, the main thing that you're going to see is a difference between doing direct sales to consumers and being more eclipsed in the food chain by working with some of the larger players in the food chain and not being at the consumer end of that chain. I see I have a question here. Okay. So Carol says that we're just starting our process of seeking markets and have heard about hubs trying to get us up to speed as possible. So what is cross-docking and what are transaction costs? Okay, thanks. I'm glad for people to ask questions. Carol says this question is basic, but it's important to keep everyone on the same page. So cross-docking, Carol, is essentially when hubs, what's the easiest way to say this? They're just moving product between one another. So they might park a product at a space and another hub picks it up, and they're using that space to, one person might have a route that's swinging through and meeting another one's route, and so they're picking it up from one truck and putting it on another and moving it from one distribution area into the other hub's distribution area. I hope that answers that question efficiently. Transaction costs are essentially the costs that it takes for a hub to do business. And maybe that question was kind of in relation to some of what Savanna was saying earlier about all the costs of, when you are organizing 20 different farmers to fill an order for one school or one institution, say, you have a lot of time costs and other investments into invoice or making a purchase from each of those farmers, communicating with each of those farmers, keeping each of those farmers keep getting an order from them, getting them to bring the produce in at the right time, getting that all prepped. And so you have more of those types of costs as you work with more smaller farmers than if you're able to source from one larger farmer. And that's where Savanna was talking about managing those transaction costs. Okay. So one other question from Carol is, are they charging for cross-docking or is it pure collaboration? And I think that's one thing that I'll move into talking a little bit about the Food Hub Managers Working Group now, and that I'm really proud of in Iowa, that these hubs, because Savanna and others got this group started, is it 3 years ago now, Savanna? Yeah, give or take. That a lot of the hubs in Iowa have really great relationships with each other. So it varies how they cross-dock, and it depends on what type of product they are moving. But in some cases, one hub might be selling the product and another hub might be buying it. In some cases, a farmer might be asking one food hub to transport it for them and be paying that hub, and then also paying the next hub whose truck it goes on to get it to its end destination. So a term that's worth knowing is constructive ownership, and it depends on who has actually purchased the product. And that's a good distinction to make between how food hubs operate as well, because like the Iowa Food Co-op that I explained to you, where there's an online marketplace, the co-op itself is not taking constructive ownership of the product. They didn't buy it from the farmer and then resell it. But some of the hubs are taking that constructive ownership. They bought it from the farmer, and they maybe bought it from 15 farmers, and now they're going to sell it to a school, and the school is going to cut a check to the food hub. This gets a little into the weeds, but as Savanna was talking about some of the requirements for what might take a food hub to break even, the more you're taking constructive ownership of something, probably the higher you're going to need to have in sales to break even, because of the fact that you are now having to put all this capital into purchasing product and turning that around. And so, like sometimes a hub might have $60,000 of sales in a month, and they've had to purchase a lot of that stuff and pay farmers before the institution or school or Hy-Vee is actually paying the hub, which means that they have to have a good line of credit to be able to carry those expenses in the gap between making payments to farmers and getting paid back from their buyers, if that makes sense. Let's see. So I want to talk a little bit more about the Food Hub Managers Working Group and what we've been doing recently, because there are a couple of questions about that. And I think I can stop sharing my screen now. We have been getting together quarterly and visiting each other's food hubs so that people can see how each other's models work and share some best practices and try to find ways around some of the obstacles that they've faced. Most recently, the hubs got together and we invited in a financial, a person who has a lot of expertise in financial management for hubs and food businesses, Tara Johnson. And so she spent 4 days with some of the hubs who have been operating for 3 years and have a lot of data about their sales and operations to kind of a foot to start off on to work with. And so we were able to do some really intense work around how food hubs business models are working, what their financials look like, and how they're going to get to a point to break even, because it is very difficult to get to that point in a business where even like the big food distributors are only making about coming out at 2% of their annual sales in terms of their kind of take home pay. So I think it's important to realize that food hubs are an answer to the questions that Savanna posed earlier of how do we get institutions to buy more local food and how do we support local farmers. But at the same time, they're very difficult in terms of a business model to make money. And so it's really important that as people look to starting food hubs or supporting food hubs, that we be really pragmatic and really learn what we're going for and what it's going to take to break even, because it is really hard. Yeah. So I wish I could hear you guys. I'm kind of wondering, I don't want us to go on too long. I'd like to open, maybe Savanna and I had chosen a couple of the questions that were asked prior to this, and maybe we could address a couple of those. And also, if people have more they want to add in the chat, we could start looking at those and seeing what ones we can answer as we look at the ones that folks had posed before we started. How does that sound to you, Savanna? Oh, I think you're still muted.
Thank you. Oh, there's an echo now. If you could mute yourselves, other presenters. Thank you. I just wanted to show y'all a place where you can go to get some more resources. and I just had it up on my computer. Just bear with me for a second. If you go to the extension store, and I think I can share this with you. So the ISU extension store has a lot of really great resources, free publications on it. They have price tags, but the price tags are mostly zero. And hopefully you can see this. So I actually, when you first go to the store, there's a search panel up at the top, and I actually just searched for my own name and found my publication. So there's a bunch of, I'll do that first. I just want to show you a few things that you might find interesting if you're wanting to get into the weeds with starting food hubs or managing food hubs. This Manager's Guide to Food Hub Finances is it's a guide to using financial metrics to evaluate the sustainability of a food hub, but it has answers to a lot of common questions about things that come up, and pricing is one of them. I saw there was a question about pricing, so I interviewed some food hubs about their approaches to pricing. And that may be a useful resource. There's also a series that I worked on with Teresa Riemerschlag and Nick McCann when he was in Iowa on different examples of meat to school programs in Iowa. So you can take a look at those publications. There's using accounting software for food hubs and processing traceable orders is a helpful introduction to QuickBooks for food hubs, but also to kind of the idea behind traceability, which is something that's increasingly important with the Food Safety Modernization Act and more customers expecting good agricultural practices certification, which requires the kind of traceability where when you sell a product to a customer, the customer should be able to pick up a box that's sitting in their cooler. If somebody gets sick, if there's some kind of foodborne contaminant, they should be able to pick up the box and look at the box and either on the spot identify the producer it came from, the date that it was harvested, or a series of information like that, or to receive a code that they can then call in and you have that information, which is more common to use a lot number or some kind of a traceability code to archive all of that, so that you can do a recall of all the similar products that were harvested from the same field by the same farmer around the same time. And this is a publication that helps you see how to do that using QuickBooks, which is an interesting exercise. And there's also a resource down here. Somebody had asked about cash flow, and this is probably my favorite publication. It's that I've written is managing cash flow for a low capital food hub startup, and it just has some general ideas and guidelines. This was based on Iowa Food Hub. And what they did with their farm share subscription program, and studying them helped me to understand why a subscription program where customers prepay is so valuable for managing cash flow and not ending up with $0 in the bank account, especially if you're going to be targeting some larger customers like institutions. So I really do see those kinds of sales as a complement to institutional sales that really help farmers break into a new market where maybe they haven't been able to sell to that school or that hospital before. I think it also talks a little bit about accounts receivable and just the importance of not extending too much credit to customers, because customers, will sometimes wait for a long time to pay, and you really have to manage your accounts receivable carefully and stay on top of customers who aren't paying on time. So there's some thoughts about that in this publication and also in the financial metrics publication that I showed you a minute ago. So I just wanted to provide that as a resource. And if you enter Food Hub into the extension source search site, you'll find lots of other publications besides the ones I wrote. There's all kinds of good resources available, so make sure you use them. Kayla, did you have a question that you want to take a stab at? That was kind of my effort at addressing the question about cash flow and some other things.
Sure. So one of the questions I kind of wanted to answer, and I'm not sure if I did it in that map I had on the screen earlier, somebody had asked about how can they access a food hub in their part of the state and find food hubs. So I think there's kind of a two-part to that question, because when I showed that map earlier, it looks like there's a million food hubs in the state, but some of those top points of light are, like a dairy company that aggregates milk from multiple farms, and so the only thing you could get from them is bottled milk or whatever that might be, versus a hub like farm table procurement and delivery that could service you with a variety of products, from vegetables to beans to milk. So I guess the way to do that, I think probably simplest would be to get in touch with me or Jason Grimm and sort of try to tell us where you're at in the state and what you're kind of looking for in a food hub. And there are a lot of areas of the state that aren't actually covered by a food hub that has a distribution route. So again, to contrast a hub like the Iowa Food Co-op in Des Moines, where farmers are bringing in product and showing up in person and consumers are coming to the site in person to pick up, from a hub like Farm Table Procurement and Delivery, where the hub has a truck, they go pick up from farms, and then they run a route through other towns. The service territory is a lot wider when you are driving a truck around, and they're more able to service certain towns in that area. So I think that the answer is that there are different hubs in Iowa which first of all serve different territories, but then also fill different niches in whether they're dealing with retail consumers or larger scale consumers, or even what products specifically they're selling. So I think it would be, something where if you can just describe what you're looking for and where you fall on that map, we could sort of put you in touch with folks that could help out. There's also been a talk of the possibility of having some nodes in Iowa, because as we talked about, it requires a pretty large amount of sales to reach higher institutional consumers if you're going to be that type of a hub. And so, if there are local farmers around you that want to get their product into a hub situation, but maybe you don't have quite enough opportunity for sales that you could start a hub, being a node where you could help other hubs aggregate produce or meat or whatever it would be from your local farmers and get those into distribution through an existing hub's logistics chain could be really helpful for your local farms without having to go to the whole expense of the learning curve of setting up an entire food hub and trying to get it to a size that will break even.
Yeah, just to highlight that, I think we've seen this swell of people starting food hubs and aggregation sites all over the country. You've seen it in West Virginia, and Iowa has seen it too. And I think that almost everybody who's out there running a food hub is right now trying to figure out how to merge with somebody else or to share infrastructure with somebody else. They're either doing it through some kind of cooperative agreement with another food hub or distributor, or they're doing it by actually merging with someone else. And so that's just something to be aware of. And just it's so hard to get up to the right scale where you can be self-sufficient. And it's so much easier if somebody else is holding all of the infrastructure that's expensive to operate, like someone to call up customers and do sales, someone to develop the branding package, somebody to manage the software, somebody to do the invoicing. If you're thinking about trying to find a way for farmers to get their products to market, you're so much better off if you can help them somehow access somebody who's already doing all of those things and has this farmer-centered mission at heart. So just an example of what we've done, there's a co-op that's formed in Wayne County, West Virginia. It's an area really impacted by the decline in coal mining, and a lot of people have lost their jobs. And so this co-op has formed of over 110 farmers, just out of nowhere, who all want to try to generate more income by farming. And they don't have a lot of infrastructure, but they have their relationships with each other. And they're really willing to put in the time to coordinate and to agree on prices and sort of use people power to to get sales, and we in return for their people power and the information they've given us about farmers in the area, we have put a satellite cold storage unit at a location near them, and we're helping them with production planning and doing trainings for their farmers, and we're providing the infrastructure that they need to get their products to market so that they don't have these heavy costs that are just way out of proportion to the scale of production that they're doing. So I really just encourage folks to look into those kinds of options, to reach out to the existing food hubs like the ones Kayla mentioned, like Farm Table Delivery, Iowa Food Hub, Iowa Food Co-op, figure out if there's a way to connect with them before trying to start something new.
One thing that Savanna just said made me think of something that I think highlights the complications of running a food hub as well. Because other distribution businesses, especially when it comes to products that are not available year-round, like produce, other distribution businesses that are getting those products from places that are not growing seasonally, from far away, they don't have to worry about having enough supply at the right times. And so they don't have to sit around and production plan with farms to figure out, we expect schools to buy X number of pounds of potatoes in this month, and we need to figure that out 8 months in advance so that some farmer can put seed potatoes in the ground and be ready to harvest them at the right time, and we can line that up with what we expect the purchasing to be. And so that's another whole area of logistics to try to meet a market demand and try to predict what that is really far in advance. So, when it comes to working in a local area and working with the seasonality of a local place in the Midwest or somewhere that's more seasonal, hubs are at a disadvantage to their other competitors who are selling produce that isn't source verified or isn't local, because they're not as flexible about the timing of where they can get it and the quantities that they will have available. So I think, on the one hand, the niche and what they're allowing consumers to do by feeling good about buying a local product, by having more control over how that product is produced and knowing the source verification, puts them in a place where maybe they can charge a little bit more. But on the other hand, they're facing some really significant challenges that their competitors in the general scheme of food distribution do not have to deal with. And that makes things a lot harder too. So I think people tend to think both of farmers and of kind of food businesses that are entering the niche space that there's a lot of money to be made in it. And I do think that it can offer small and medium farmers a livelihood that they wouldn't be able to find in commodity markets at a smaller size of a farm. But at the same time, there are other costs associated with getting certifications or selling seasonally, both for farmers and for hubs, that we can't really overlook as we look at the entire food system and how we can make these businesses profitable and sustainable.
So what other questions do people have?
There's a chat box and a Q&A, and I think you can enter it into either. We can keep an eye on both.
So I'm hoping people will type some questions, but while we're waiting to see if folks do, there had been a question sent ahead of time about price, and so maybe I'll talk a little bit more about pricing. So Kayla talked earlier about how the margins or markups tend to be larger for retail than for food service or wholesale distribution. So just to give an example, like one of the food hubs that I studied, their margins were anywhere from 30 to 50% of the sales dollar for their retail sales where they were doing a CSA type program, a subscription program, which is really high. That's higher than average, I'd say. But so that means that for every dollar that a consumer paid, 30 to 50 cents was going to the food hub to pay for their operations, and then the rest was going to the farmer. And that sounds, sometimes you can look at it different ways. You could say like, oh, wow, that food hub sure is skimming a lot off the top. But really what matters is the price that's paid to the farmer, I think. So, if a food hub is really good at marketing themselves and really good at finding a customer who's willing to pay more for the product, then it kind of doesn't matter what they're charging, as long as they're paying the farmer what the farmer needs and it's supporting the food hub. And so retail is appealing because there is more flexibility. Some consumers are really sensitive to prices, but there's a lot of consumers out there who they just don't budget as tightly as like a cafeteria manager would. Somebody who is operating on this incredibly narrow budget, trying to make school lunches, for less than $3 per lunch. So that's why the margins are different on retail. And also there's more that goes into retail because it's a more labor intensive type of market. So you have to deal with lots and lots of little transactions. We talked about transaction costs before, those costs that go along with each sale. And that you just have lots of little invoices to handle, and you have people with customer service issues who might be buying a $10 product instead of, $200 worth of product. They might have the same number of customer service requests and questions and issues. So that's kind of why retail has a larger margin. So it may or may not be a better deal when you look at all the costs of doing retail or direct to consumer sales to individuals and households. But it sometimes can be a better deal. So as far as wholesale, I think there's a lot of different philosophies about what's an appropriate margin for wholesale. So how much of each sales dollar should be kept by the food hub for operational costs. It's usually in the neighborhood of 15 to 25%. I see a lot of people operating right at about 20%. So that's the flip side of a markup. So markup is like a little bit numerically different from a margin. Instead of being like the portion of the sales dollar that the customer pays, it's like, how do you multiply the price, the purchase price, to get to the final price that you're going to sell. I'm sorry if this is like too much jargon. You can just ask me questions and I'll stop. But it's helpful to understand the difference. So a markup is like, I buy the product for $1. I mark it up by 10%, and then the product costs $1.10 to the end consumer. So the margin markups are smaller for wholesale than retail, and so you should benchmark them in different ways. You should use different tools to make decisions about what the right price is. So we compare our prices to for our farm shares, for our direct to consumer sales. We compare them to farm CSAs. We see whether we're charging what farms are charging for similar subscription programs on a weekly basis. And with our wholesale, we look at what our customers are currently paying, and then we usually charge a little bit more because we have to. But we try not to base too much of our pricing off of the market, and we try to base it more off of what farmers say they need. And so that's why it's so important that that the farmers you work with understand what their costs are and what prices they do need to break even on their products. And I feel like that's really the role for Extension. I feel like Extension and food hubs need to have a really close relationship with each other, because if farmers don't understand their own costs, then they'll never be able to tell you the price they need. And you can't use that as a starting negotiation point. If the farmer firmly understands what they need to make a living, then that becomes a negotiation point with your customers that you can go back and forth with them, and you can vigorously defend your farmer's price. And it doesn't always work that way, but it can work that way if you're good at communicating with your customers. And Red Tomato they're a large food hub in the Northeast. They kind of introduced that idea to me. They call it dignity pricing. So you always start with the price that the farmer needs, and then you negotiate from there with an idea of what the market expects. You know what the difference is going into the conversation between what the farmer needs and what the market expects. But you start with what the farmer needs. So that's kind of my philosophy too on pricing. And I see looks like we did have a question here. So we had a request to go through some of the types of hubs. No, not a confusing question. I'm just thinking how to answer it.
I can help a little bit.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was looking at it and sort of thinking about it. So I guess you can look at this maybe from a couple of different lenses. And they always say when you've seen one food hub, you've seen one food hub, because they can be so different. So I think one thing to keep in mind is there are hubs out there that are food hubs that might be doing some of the sales, but also having a big educational mission or component, and possibly even doing more educational programming. But so you can probably think of it in terms of hubs that are doing a lot of sales versus hubs that are doing sales and a wider mission, or even more of a wider mission. But then when you get into the hubs that are doing sales, you might try to divide that, if you had a little tree, into hubs that are focusing very heavily on direct-to-consumer sales versus those that are focusing more heavily on institutional sales. And from there, you could take the institutional sales and think about hubs that are not taking constructive ownership of products. So they're just sort of doing a brokerage situation where maybe they're not actually buying directly from the farmers. They are helping the farmers organize themselves to aggregate the products, and then they're selling that into the accounts, and they're simply being paid a fee to do that. So even though they're still selling to larger consumers, they don't need quite as much of a sales to break even, because they aren't having that cash flow issue of buying all this product and then selling it to all the accounts. So on the institutional side, you have that sort of brokerage type of food hub, and then you have a food hub that would be more taking the constructive possession. And from there, you could even have hubs. Either of those types of hubs might have their own trucks and distribution routes, or they might be working with third parties to actually get those products picked up from farms and take them back where they need to be. So it's hard to sort of typify hubs as to, like, you have this type and this type and this type. It's sort of a tree of choices that you can make as a food hub manager about what parts of the food system of the whole food chain you want to try to actually do yourself, and what parts you are going to work with other types of businesses to do to get the products where they need to be. Does that make sense? Okay. And Savanna, do you have some more observations to add to that? That's kind of an answer on the fly.
Yeah, I thought that was helpful. I mean, I think, it does go back to, like you said, which parts of the food chain do you want to be part of? So do you want to be involved in processing or no? Do you want to be involved in aggregation or not? Do you want to be involved in distribution or not? Are you going to, and every food hub is so totally different. They all have different sets of costs. They all have different sets of services. That's why it's almost like tricky to even label them under one name. I just encourage folks, there's a lot of literature out there about food hubs. And I just encourage you to realize that somebody you might be reading about out there who's seems to be doing something similar to what you want, they might actually be totally different. Their costs might be totally different. Their motivations might be totally different. So not every example necessarily applies. But I think Kayla mentioned the question of whether the hub is going to own the product versus sort of be acting as a broker for the product, and maybe taking it on consignment or just selling it for a commission. And I think one really important difference between those two approaches to understand is that when you're taking ownership of the product, you have a little more freedom to be entrepreneurial with your pricing. depending on how your system is set up. But, if you buy a product for $5, you can go to the market that will pay $10, or you can go to the market that will pay $6. And you have freedom to change the price, and you absorb the consequences, positive or negative, of how you change the price. And so I think that allows you to maybe access customers you wouldn't otherwise access, maybe by lowering the price a little bit, or it might allow you to capture a bigger margin than what you expected. If you realize that you're coming in below people's expectations, you can raise your prices. So I'm kind of an advocate of taking ownership. The other reason that there's two other reasons I like taking ownership of products. One is that it's better for the farmer, or it's often better for the farmer to just to be able to sell products outright to a third party and not have to worry about marketing through somebody else. I think most farmers would really just like to take a truckload of something and sell it all at once and get a check. And then the third reason is, when you buy the product outright and then resell it, there's two ways that you can impact your own profitability. You can increase revenue through your sales and marketing efforts, and you can control costs through your efficiency. And if you're acting as a pass-through, and you're just providing a marketplace for farmers, like an online marketplace is an example, and farmers just post the products, customers go on, they buy the products directly from the customers, and the Food Hub automatically gets 15% or whatever it is. Like, the Food Hub doesn't have as much control over the volume of sales. They don't have as much of a direct role in the sales. And so really the best way for the Food Hub to be profitable is just to control costs, just to cut costs and keep costs low for every transaction. And that's not necessarily the nicest position to be in, to just be worrying about costs. So that's just my take on it. That's why we buy products outright from farmers. We own them, we put them in our cold storage, and then we sell them. But a lot of Food Hubs are very successful with consignment models or brokerage models. They just have different things that go along with them.
One Food Hub that is a little unique that I thought it'd be fun to point out, that is part of our Food Hub Managers Working Group, is Iowa Choice Harvest. And they are flash freezing corn and other vegetables, and then marketing that under their own in-house brand. So, whereas somebody like Farm Table Procurement and Delivery might be selling black beans labeled from Jason Grimm's Grimm Family Farm, somebody like Iowa Choice Harvest has not just a brand as a distributor, but a brand as in, like, you pick this brand up in the grocery store and it is co-branded by the farmers and falls under sort of one marketing idea. I don't know if I'm not describing that quite as succinctly as I want to, because there's still a brand associated with the hubs. Somebody knows if they've bought something from Farm Table Procurement and Delivery, but they also see the product as the farmer has packaged it with the farmer's logo or whatever marketing they have on it, versus something like Iowa Choice Harvest, which is aggregating produce from multiple farms and then bringing that under one big umbrella brand for the customer, and sort of guaranteeing that the quality from all those farms will be the same through their freezing process, and through picking out the same varieties of corn and planting it at the same certain time and picking it at the same type of maturity and freezing it all in the same process, if that makes sense. And even though that's very different than some of the other Food Hubs that we're sort of looking at and talking about, it also functions like a hub in that aggregation and distribution piece, but there is now also a processing component in there.
Yeah, and that question about how much should there be labeling for the Food Hub, should there be labeling for the farm, like how many entities, how much do we need to source identify this product, and what does the customer care about, I think is a really big question. I think it really depends on who the customer is and what you know about them. Like, we've been dealing with a distributor that works with grocery stores and trying to decide whether to work with them. And one of the reasons that they want to work with a food hub, and that I think we could be beneficial to farmers, is if they're going to carry local carrots. They don't want to have, in their system, they manage according to item codes. They carry a certain number of products in their product line, and each product is they call them SKUs, because each one has an SKU number. So it's like, I have 5,000 SKUs. I have a lot of items in my product list, and they don't want a different SKU for every local farm that has local carrots, because they don't want customers to have to look at a price list that has these 5 different SKUs from 5 different local farms and try to figure out what the difference is between them. So they want to carry one SKU that's carrots, or carrots of a certain packaging size or whatever, and one SKU that's local carrots, and that's it. And so working with us gives them the ability to carry fewer SKUs, like to just have like their representative local product. Because we can provide a lot of product that, from the customer perspective, is like somewhat uniformly local carrots, but then we lose a lot of value when we do that, because we don't have information about the farm on the carrots. And so how do you get that story that translates into dollars? How do you get it to the customer with the carrots? And that's where, you see, like on milk cartons sometimes, with like Organic Valley, or we have Snowville Creamery in our area, they'll highlight a member farm of a group of farms to try to convey some of that story to the customer on the packaging of the product. So, I don't know if my milk from Organic Valley came from Farmer Abe or Farmer Joe, but I know that there's a picture of Farmer Joe on the side, which gives me an example of the kind of farmer my products might have come from. And so it's like, it's tricky figuring out that right level of like traceability and transparency in the supply chain that gives the customer just the right amount of information so that they know they want the product and are willing to pay more for it because it's local, but also to make it really simple for for your distributor, if you're working with a distributor, to carry the product without having to worry about all these different farms, if that makes sense. So I feel like it's kind of a balancing act, and it's like a messaging and packaging marketing challenge. Looks like we got another question.
So I would have a question for some of the participants. How many of you are in a position where you would be looking to purchase something from a food hub versus a position where you feel like you need to help some type of food hub start? Are any of you trying to find out how to buy things from a food hub, I guess, versus are some of you trying to figure out how to organize a food hub? So if you could type in the chat box if you're in either of those positions, that'd be interesting.
I saw the question from Carol about, do we have a road show that we can bring to Kentucky? I'd be happy to talk to you offline about that, since I'm in West Virginia, which is close. But there's also a ton of resources. If you haven't already checked out the National Good Food Network website, they have a special page for food hubs. If you just Google National Good Food Network Food Hub or Wallace Center Food Hub, there's like a huge archive of webinars and resources, and they also do kind of boot camps for food hubs around the country, or at least they were doing that up until recently. So that's another place to look for training.
I'll put that in the chat box. The other thing that would, I think, interest folks is a podcast from Tara Johnson called Edible Alpha. And she interviews all kinds of food businesses on there, and a lot of the interviews are pertinent for food hubs too. But she does have couple, maybe more than one, but definitely one really good podcast with the Wisconsin Food Hub Cooperative. And if I remember right, they're a brokerage food hub that deals mostly in produce in Wisconsin. So that would be a good thing to listen to. I'll put that in the chat box too. Savanna, I think you're muted.
Somebody chatted in the chat box, and I don't think everybody could see it. We were talking about different labeling in a way that makes the source farm more transparent to the customer. Somebody said there's a hard cider company in Wisconsin that aggregates apples from nearby farms for processing, but they have a different stamp for each apple farm, and each six pack has the stamp. So that's like a great example of sort of item level, like product level traceability or transparency for the customer about where something came from. So I'm going to say that we wait to see about questions for another minute or two, and then if we don't get any more questions, maybe we'll wrap up.
That's a good idea. Questions or comments? If you guys have any comments or thoughts that this food hub webinar has brought to mind, be interesting to hear too.
I'm going to go ahead and share the screen one more time with my contact information in case anyone wants to get in touch. Oh, I just had it. Might have closed that actually. Hang on. I'll just put it in the chat box. Easier.
I just put my information in the chat box as well, and that's my cell phone number. So I'm usually pretty easy to reach at it.
Okay, well, we appreciate y'all visiting with us, and feel free to contact us with other questions that you have. Kayla, do you have anything else to add before we wrap up?
I don't think so. I think we've kind of touched on a lot of different resources that are out there. This webinar kind of scratched the surface, but also went into depth on a few things, as it's hard to kind of stay at the surface and not dig too deep into some of the details. But if you need some of those resources reiterated, don't hesitate to reach out, because there's a bunch of different organizations that Savanna mentioned that can give you really good ideas of where to start if you're digging into specific questions. Well, thanks everybody for coming and for your interest in food hubs and for working in local food development. And yeah, appreciate this topic being brought up, and glad that Lynn got us together today. And Emily, thanks for hosting.
Thank you guys. Great job.
Thanks. Take care.
See ya.
Take care, everybody.
Bye-bye.